This day in sports history. It's June 4th, and on this day in 1923, a jockey died during a race, and the horse still won. Jockey Frank Hayes was not your average jockey. He loved horses, always wanted to be around horses, and he enjoyed working with them. Now, that is not what made him an oddball. That's pretty standard. But at 142 pounds, he was a lot heavier than the average jockey. Instead, he became a stable hand, watching and dreaming of one day getting that chance to ride a horse to a win. Well, that day came when the owner of a horse named Sweet Kiss was in need of a jockey for a race at Belmont Park on this day. The day before, the owner came to Hayes and told him that if he could lose 10 pounds, so drop it down to 132 pounds, then he could ride the horse in the race. Hayes, eager for his chance, said he would, and he started fasting, no food, no water, to go along with vigorous exercise. When he weighed in the next day, he'd actually lost 12 pounds, again in 24 hours. We know now that that is not healthy. It puts a lot of stress on the heart. But again, this is 1923, and so on this day, the 22-year-old Hayes mounted up on Sweet Kiss, a 20-1 long shot in this race. When the gates opened, Hayes and Sweet Kiss took off and put some distance between themselves and the other horses. But those watching the race noticed Hayes slumped over midway around the track. The horse kept running and crossed the finish line in first place. In his first ever race as a jockey, Frank Hayes had won atop Sweet Kiss. The horse's owner was ecstatic and ran to congratulate the horse and the rider. But when he got to them, Hayes was still slumped over. When the owner tried to rouse Hayes, the jockey fell from the saddle and crashed to the ground. A doctor rushed over, felt for a pulse that wasn't there. He later suggested that Hayes had collapsed and died during the race from a heart attack. It was his only win, and Frank Hayes is the only jockey to die during a race and still win it. Sweet Kiss earned the harsh nickname Sweet Kiss of Death and never raced again. Hayes was buried in a Brooklyn cemetery in the racing silks he wore on this day in 1923. From that tragic story to a story that was nearly tragic, on this day in 1947, Brooklyn Dodger Pete Reiser crashed into the outfield fence and nearly died. The fact that Reiser was going after a ball so hard that he crashed into the wall was not unusual in the least. On the field, he always seemed to play hell-bent for leather. He'd done it several times before and had suffered injury before. 5 years earlier, in 1942, he crashed into the outfield wall trying to catch up with an Enos Slaughter shot. He suffered a concussion, and Slaughter scored what would be the winning run on an inside-the-park home run. While playing ball in the Army during World War II, he dove over a fence chasing down a ball and then fell down a 10-foot ditch, injuring his shoulder, an injury that slowed his return to the major leagues and the starting lineup once the war was over. In 1946, he suffered another concussion going headlong into the wall. He was injury-prone, but mostly because of his own doing. So on this day in 1947, the Dodgers were playing the Pittsburgh Pirates at Ebbets Field. With one out in the top of the sixth and Brooklyn leading 7-2, Dodgers pitcher Ralph Branca threw a 3-2 fastball to Pirate Cully Rickard. Rickard lashed a ball deep to center, and Reiser went after it the only way he knew how to play, all out. Never slowing down, Reiser reached up, caught the ball, and then slammed into the concrete wall, hitting his head against it. He slumped to the ground, unconscious, and bleeding profusely from a V-shaped gash on his head. Seeing Reiser get injured did not faze the Dodger crowd on hand. They'd seen it many times before, but the crowd went silent because, well, they thought the ball had been a home run. It wasn't until the ball was pried from Reiser's glove and the second out of the inning went up on the board that the crowd roared. Reiser was carried off the field on a stretcher and taken into the clubhouse. After a quick check, the team doctor summoned a priest who was seen through a cracked door administering last rites to Reiser. But that was a bit premature. Reiser regained consciousness a few minutes later, understandably woozy and not feeling very well. He had no memory of the play. He was handed a cigarette, as they did back in the 1940s, and he was taken to the closest hospital a few minutes later. X-rays did not show any skull fracture as initially feared, hence the priest, but he did suffer another concussion along with a few lacerations on his face and scalp. He spent 5 days in the hospital, and he was back in the lineup on June 12th. He did have lingering effects, though, enduring headaches and dizzy spells for the rest of the year. Now, here's the thing. Pistol Pete Reiser is a guy that many who played with or against him say would have been one of the all-time greats if he'd played the game just a little bit safer. In 1941, he led the National League, hitting .343 with 39 doubles, 17 triples, and he also led the league in runs scored. He finished second in the MVP voting that season to teammate Dolph Camilli. Famed New York sports writer Red Smith once wrote of Reiser, quote, "Pete may have been born to be the best player who ever lived, but there was never a park big enough to contain his effort." This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1976, it was the greatest NBA game ever played. Now, this was Game 5 of the NBA Finals between the Boston Celtics and the surprising Phoenix Suns. This was the first trip to the finals for the Suns franchise. After finishing just 2 games over 500 in the regular season, they pulled off the upset in both of their conference series to get to this point, beating the 2-seed Seattle in 6 games and then the top-seeded Golden State Warriors in a 7-game series. Here in the finals, the Suns had won games 3 and 4 to even the series at 2 games apiece to set up this showdown in the Boston Garden. The Celtics looked like they would make this a blowout, taking a 20-point lead in the first quarter. The Suns spent the remainder of the night clawing their way back into it. In the fourth quarter, with a minute and a half to play, Paul Westphal hit a bucket to cut the Celtic lead to 3. A minute later, Westphal would hit a layup and get fouled, make the free throw to tie it at 95, and send the game into overtime. Each team scored 6 in the first OT, setting up the dramatics in the second overtime. With 19 seconds left in the second OT, Boston's JoJo White hit a layup to give the Celtics a 3-point lead. I'll let a young Brent Musburger, who was calling the game that day for CBS, take over with what happened next.
Crowd chanting defense. Lumpkin, Westphal, and Van Arsdale on the floor. Van Arsdale with a quick shot. It's a 1-point game again. Just what Rick predicted. Westphal to the corner. Back to Van Arsdale. Perry in the air. Won't go. Havlicek. Perry again. Perry with a jump shot. Put it down. Phoenix has gone ahead. We've got 5 seconds. I don't believe it. I don't believe what I just saw down here.
Well, what Brent saw and described was a 4-point swing for the Suns, with Curtis Perry rebounding his own miss and sinking the go-ahead bucket. Suns led by 1 with 5 seconds left. Out of the ensuing timeout, the Celtics got the ball at half court to inbound.
Clock will start when it's touched. Havlicek touches it. It begins. 3 seconds. Hondo off the glass. He's done it with a second. John Havlicek won it. It's over.
There's 2 seconds to go.
The Boston Celtics, but the clock should have run out. Or did it have to?
There are 2
Everybody's on
seconds
the
to go in
floor.
this basketball game, Brent. The ball went in with 2 seconds to go, and the clock has to stop on a made basket.
Havlicek's shot put the Celtics up 1, but as it went in, there was still time on the clock. Baseline official Richie Powers signaled there was 1 second left. The game was not over. But the Celtics bolted to the locker room, thinking the game was over. Boston fans lining the court rushed onto the parquet floor in celebration. And as Powers was making his way to the scorer's table to signal that there was time left in the game, he was attacked by a fan.
Richie Powers is in a fight with a fan right here in front. Referee Richie Powers was assaulted by a fan. They pulled the bore off. They're the cops out in the middle. They got fans out in the middle of the floor. The Phoenix Suns trying to get it cleared.
Fans were pushing and hitting the Phoenix players. Police were on the floor attempting to clear the court, but it took 10 minutes before order could be restored and the final second could be played out. Now, what happened next is sheer genius, and maybe one of the reasons that Paul Westphal ended up as a head coach after his playing career. The Suns were out of timeouts. They were going to inbound under the Celtics basket, and they would have to go the length of the floor with 1 second left and hope for a miracle. Westphal checked with Richie Powers first, and then he went to Suns head coach John McLeod, telling him that his idea was to call a timeout that the Suns did not have. The resulting technical foul would give Boston one free throw, but allow the Suns to advance to half court to throw it in.
Won't start until it's touched. They'll have to throw it up. Garher, turnaround, shot in the air. It's good. It's tied again. I don't believe it. Garfield heard at the buzzer, threw one in outside. We've got a third overtime at a Boston Garden. It's 112-112.
At that point, it was after midnight, and the players were exhausted. The Celtics managed to build a 6-point lead in the third OT. Westphal hit a pair of free throws in the final seconds to cut the lead back to 2, and then nearly came up with another steal. But finally, the Celtics were able to dribble out the clock and put the lid on a 128-126 triple overtime win. It was the longest game in the NBA Finals and has only been equaled once. That game also involved the Phoenix Suns in the 1993 Finals against the Chicago Bulls. Let's go back to 1974 when the Cleveland Indians thought it'd be a great idea to have a 10-cent beer night as they hosted the Texas Rangers. Now, it does not take a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon to figure out that this can go south in a hurry. If you do the conversion, that would be like offering a 75-cent beer night now. Now, this story needs a little background to completely understand all the moving parts. This was not the first 10-cent beer night in Major League Baseball. In fact, the Rangers had a 10-cent beer night a few weeks prior when the Indians had swung through Texas. In that game, after an Indians player was deemed to have slid a little bit too hard in the second trying to break up a double play, well, pitches were thrown at Indians players, a little up and in, a little chin music, and when one of those pitches with intent connected, the benches cleared in an all-out brawl. After that game, Cleveland sports radio man Pete Franklin began stoking the flames of retribution for when the Rangers came to town. Also, the city of Cleveland was mired in a decade-long economic decline. Factory after factory closed and moved elsewhere, leaving an environmental disaster in its wake. Oh, and this night, it was hot in Cleveland. The kind of hot that creates a tremendous thirst and that one 10-cent beer cannot quench. The team was a game under 500 heading into this one, but it had really been a 30-year slump for the club. Attendance was way down, typically around 7,000 a night at this point. Well, on this night, they drew 25,000 fans, with their fires lit by local sports talk radio with the added lure of cheap beer and not much in the way of a limit. Things got ugly. In fact, one Cleveland sports writer chronicling the event said the fans, mostly college students home on break, showed up drunk and then started buying more beer. And to be fair, the beer had been watered down a little bit, and there was supposed to be a limit of 6 beers per person. But there were no limits on the number of trips to the beer stand one could make. In the second inning, an older woman climbed over the rail and ran to the on-deck circle, opened her blouse, and flashed all who could see. She was removed by police. Another thing to know, the fad of streaking was also a thing on a lot of college campuses at this point. In the fourth inning, one gentleman stripped down to nothing, jumped the railing, bolted for second, and slid in. Yeah, ouch. He got up and ran, jumping the railing again, and he actually got away. Later on, fans threw firecrackers on the field. The umpires paused the game and tried to get the PA guy to calm the crowd down. That did not work. In fact, things only got worse. Hot dogs were thrown at the Rangers players. Somebody who'd brought a gallon of wine into the game threw that at a player, nearly hitting him. When a fan jumped the rail and stole the cap off of one of the Texas outfielders, that was it for Rangers manager Billy Martin, who grabbed a bat and led his team into the outfield to protect his player. The hot-headed Martin was ready to wield it on the next streaking, hat-stealing, inebriated fan. The overserved fans poured over the railing, many of them mostly or completely naked. They ended up stealing first, second, and third base. That did it. The game was called in the ninth with the score tied at 5, but it could not be completed and Cleveland forfeited. Several people were injured badly enough that they had to be taken to the emergency room. 9 people were arrested, so that certainly was the end of 10-cent beer night, right? Nope. The Indians had another one later in the year, after the college kids went back to school, that is, and the game was played with no disruptions. And on this day in 1988, Steffi Graf made really fast work of the French Open finals match. Graf was the defending champ, the top seed, and the #1 women's player in the world. Belarus's Natasha Zvereva was the 13 seed and had advanced to the finals after beating second-seeded Martina Navratilova in straight sets in the 4th round, 6th seed Helena Suková in the quarters, and Aussie Nicole Provis in the semis. Maybe Zvereva was flat worn out, or it could have been simply that Graf was head and shoulders above everybody else, but Graf dispatched Zvereva 6-love, 6-love in 32 minutes to win the French Open title. It is the only double bagel in a Grand Slam championship final in the Open era, and it was the fastest Grand Slam final in the Open era. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. It's beach season for a lot of folks, and for many women it means bikini time. While the modern bikini dates to the 1940s, ancient Roman women were sporting two-piece outfits long before that. A mosaic found painted on a wall depicted 4 women engaged in athletic activities wearing a top and bottom combo, similar if not almost exactly like modern bikinis. Archaeologists are unsure if the outfits were worn for swimming or if it was more for the pursuit of athletics. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.